almost starting on time. Javed originally suggested some form of seminar. And originally I wasn't sure what best to suggest, but then I came up with the idea that perhaps for many of you, you've never actually exhibited stamps before. And for a lot of you, this might be a whole new experience. So the talk is focused around the question of, do you want to be an exhibitor? So now you've decided you want to be an exhibitor. How do you start to think about the process? And what do you need to consider in preparing an exhibit? So what is a collection and what is an exhibit? They are, in fact, really two very different things. A collection is basically the material you have at home, arranged however you want, in whatever way, whether it's in cardboard boxes, envelopes, whatever you want to do. You can do whatever you like. However, when you transfer to doing an exhibit, then it's something completely different. You have to organize the material in line with the expectations and the criteria of the show. You have to conform to the expectations of the judges. You have to provide the material in a way that's appealing to the public. And most importantly, if you want to do well, you have to please the judges in what you do. And that involves several stages, several processes. You have to conform to the requirements of the show. Now, in fairness, and in the interest of full disclosure, not every collector wants to be an exhibitor. A lot of times they're quite happy working on their stamps at home, in private, enjoying the material that they own. And that is, for many people, what makes them happy. That's what brings them joy. They have no interest in exhibiting. However, I would argue that in fact they are missing out on many things. If you simply want to share your collection with friends and family, similar to your collection, you don't have to organize it in any traditional way. You can have it in glassine envelopes in a box, you can lay it out on the table, you can sit there and you can share it amongst yourselves. That's one thing. But the minute you move to an exhibition, then, as I've stressed, you have to start to focus more on doing certain things. Now, we always talk about a stamp exhibition. Now, for most other events, an exhibition is something you go and you admire and you enjoy looking at, whether it's paintings or jewelry or cars. But for most stamp collectors, the idea of an exhibition is really a competition. It's a competition. There's going to be, in most cases, a first prize, a second prize. There are going to be medals. And in fact, over the years, there have been very, very few actual non-competitive shows. About 20 years ago, the Claridge's shows in London, which were held at the Claridge's Hotel, those were strictly non-competitive. Each exhibitor put up 2 frames and everybody could come and enjoy them. Currently, you have every 2 years, you have the shows in Monaco. Again, these are non-competitive. They do give you a medal for participating, but there is no judging criteria, there is no assessing the relative strengths and weaknesses of the exhibits. It's purely an exhibition. So just to clarify, an exhibition in most cases for us is a competition. Now, why would you want to become an exhibitor? What overwhelming reasons would drive you to want to exhibit? Well, in some cases, it is, as we've talked about, to share with other people, to let them see what you've collected. It's also an opportunity for you to present and to share the knowledge that you have about what you collect. But more importantly, it's also a way in which you yourself can gain knowledge. You can get feedback from other collectors. You can get feedback from the judges. Sometimes the judges know what they're talking about and their opinions are helpful. So it's an opportunity for you to actually learn and gain knowledge from presenting your exhibit. And of course, last but not least, for some people, they just want to win the top award. They want the grand award. It matters more than anything else to them to win that big award. Now, again, reiterating display or competition, that's really a very important divergence. You can give non-competitive displays at your local stamp clubs. You can share with your colleagues at the Qatar Numismatic and Philatelic Club. You can share them with other members of the association. But again, exhibiting, transitioning to an exhibition, you are putting yourself in front of judges, you're going to be judged, and you're going to be graded against a series of criteria. The judges, it is not a completely subjective process. The judges have very, very strict criteria against which they are going to be assessing your exhibit. It isn't simply, well, I don't like it, or well, I like it. It's very much based on quantifiable numbers that are allocated to certain criteria. Now, a whole new area for discussion, and this is one which for many people is still controversial, and that is exhibiting in person or exhibiting virtually. And I'm sure each and every one of you who is an exhibitor or who has exhibited probably has an opinion about the merits of showing virtually or showing in person. Obviously, if you submit your exhibit to an electronic show, it's easy. You create it digitally, you send it electronically to the show, it's mounted, it's done, but you don't get any of that personal interaction. For an in-person show, you can go, you can stand with your friends in front of the frames, you can show the actual items, you are almost as close as you can touch the items themselves, you can really experience the material more. But in fairness, and this is one of the downsides of exhibitions in person, you have to take the material, depending where you live, it has to be carried overseas, you've got to go through customs with it. There are procedures, you can have things get lost, things can get damaged, which doesn't happen with a virtual show. However, opinions are still divided. Now, people say, well, virtual exhibiting, that's only happened since COVID. This COVID brought on the virtual exhibiting. Well, that's not really true. Actually, the first virtual exhibits were actually held in New York in the early 2000s, long before Zoom, long before a lot of the modern technological innovations. They were organized by the American Stamp Dealers Association, and they were called at the time Digital Philatelic Studies. Now, what was different about a digital philatelic study? Well, it was not just a scan of a regular stamp exhibit. Most of the virtual shows that are taking place today, all you do is scan the pages of your exhibit and send them electronically. There's really not that much difference between the pages in the frames and the pages on a computer screen. The digital philatelic studies at the time were a lot more innovative. They were more like research, more like study. You weren't restricted to 16 pages in a frame. You actually had a digital file that you could manipulate, you could add, you could enlarge, you could reduce. You also were able to bring in other forms of media. You could add sound, you could add moving images. And at the time, those studies were judged. They were a competition, just like a stamp exhibition, they were a competition. And what was taken into account were three issues: the personal research, the philatelic research on the material, a certain assessment of computer skills. The more advantage that you took of the different media, the different computer benefits, you got credit for. And of course, you got credit for the philatelic material. So in a way, it was similar to an exhibit. You got credit for your presentation, how you expanded and enlarged upon the exhibit, and how you presented it. You got credit for research, for study, and you got credit for the material that you actually showed. Now, COVID, of course, as we all think, is what really brought on a big rush towards the virtual world of philatelic exhibiting. However, as I mentioned earlier, in most cases, all it is somebody scanning the pages of their exhibit. You could say, what is really progress about that? It's not really a lot of progress. It's simply putting it in another way. There's no real attempt to provide sound or moving visuals. If you want to go in and study a variety or a variation in detail, they don't offer you the ability to click on the image and enlarge it to bring it forward. So really, it's still a very restrictive form of exhibiting. And in fairness, and Javed may or may not agree with this, many of the senior judges simply have closed their mind to the idea of virtual exhibiting. They're resistant to it. They don't like it. They want to see the items. And the argument that they frequently present is, well, how do we know that the person really owns the item that they're showing? Well, that is a consideration, but it can also happen in a real-world in-person exhibit. Javed might lend Hussein something to put in his exhibit, or Hussein might lend Abdul Khoury something to put in his exhibit. What is the difference? It depends on your perspective. If you want to say virtual shows are a bad idea, you'll find every reason. Personally speaking, and I've always been an advocate of the virtual shows, I think it's the way of the future. Why? They're easy and inexpensive to host. Surprisingly, India and Bangladesh have been really two of the countries very much in the forefront of this. And even in 2021, already almost 3 years ago, FIAP recognized an international virtual show in Bangladesh. In South America, the South Americans too have their own virtual shows. Now, the idea of this was not to propagandize virtual exhibiting, but I think it's a good idea, and hopefully in the future it will become more prevalent. As I mentioned, Asia is very much in the forefront of it, but other countries are catching up. Bangladesh, they had their first, as I say, FIAP show. A couple of years ago, we had the Abraham Accords show between UAE, US, and Israel. And South Africa, every year, has their SAVPEX one-frame virtual exhibition, a tremendous opportunity for people who want to show a single frame. In terms of where it stands, it's still experimental. It's not yet mainstream. There's a way to go, but hopefully that's the way or a direction that it will take. Now, let's go back to that big first question. So now you want to start to exhibit. Where do you start? What is the best first step that you can make? Well, the short answer is very simple. You should go to and attend as many exhibitions as possible. And you should study and look at all of the different exhibits and look for ideas. Look for how did this person put their exhibit together? What type of page did they use? What color of page did they use? Did they use black Hoyd mounts? How did they mount their covers? What were the different things that they did? Also look at the subjects, look at the titles, look at the different areas, the different postal history, revenues, traditional. Get as much information as you possibly can. The frames are the greatest source of information and guidance as to different ideas. Having attended the shows, research the opportunities. Think about what shows there are. Where do I live? What shows are available to me? Here, you're lucky. You have the two shows. You have the Mega Mall show and you have this show. Almost 2 shows every year. Not all countries have that opportunity. In the States, we're spoiled. We have about 30 national shows a year. So wherever you live, wherever you have access to exhibitions, look at the opportunities that are available to you. Think about the question, do you want to be responsible for getting your exhibit to a show? Do you want to submit it virtually? These are actually important questions to think about, because you're expected, if you apply to a show and you are accepted, you are expected to bring your exhibit to the show. You're expected to show up. If you don't show up, you will find, as an exhibitor, you get penalized. Shows don't like exhibitors when they don't show up. So you've got to take the exhibit, you've got to mount the exhibit, you've got to take it home. These are all practical things that you need to think about. Choose your venue. And then I think probably one of the best pieces of suggestion, advice, guidance, and I said this to you yesterday when we were talking about your postcard exhibit. Start small, start local. Don't rush to put together an 8-frame exhibit. An 8-frame exhibit is a huge amount of work. It's a tremendous amount of work. Start with a small exhibit. Start with something small, get some experience putting it together, think more about what it is you want the exhibit to cover and how you want it to develop. This is a cumulative process. Don't start at the end. Start small and ideally choose a local show that you can get to easily as your first opportunity. Then over time you can progress. You can progress as you buy more material, you acquire more material, as you get more knowledge, as you get feedback from the judges. So start small and start local. Now, how big an exhibit can you make? I said an 8-frame exhibit. Well, exhibits can range anywhere between basically 1 page and 10 frames. In the US, you can actually put together 10-frame exhibits, 10 frames of 16 pages. That's a lot of material, a lot of work. Now, a logical question is, well, do I have enough material? How much material do I have? How many covers? How many proofs? How many essays? How many frames can I realistically fill? That's, again, a practical consideration and another reason to start small. Because over time, your collection hopefully grows and expands. You can't necessarily expect to have all the material right at the start. Now, I mentioned that you can start with 1 page. Javed, this is something you guys might want to consider for some of your upcoming shows. Give people a chance to show 1 page. Now, it seems illogical. How can you make an exhibit of 1 page? Well, it's just like any other exhibit. It's a complete story in 1 page. It might be 1 item. It might be a small number of items that are closely related. It's an easy way to start. I mean, for example, the 1 page which is shown on the screen. This is a souvenir cover for a around the world flight, which Ernie Kerr, a noted American philatelist, he was a journalist, and the Fresh Air Fund was a way for benefiting children, impoverished children in inner city New York, to go out to the country in the summer and experience country life. And this was a fundraising flight that he did back in 1955. There only ever was 1 cover for the flight. The Fresh Air Fund still exists to this day, but as best as I know, this is the only philatelic item that relates to the Fresh Air Fund. It's a complete story. Obviously, you could embellish it and talk about Ernie Kerr and his life and his philatelic interests, but in terms of the relationship, the link between Kerr and the Fresh Air Fund, this is it. This is the complete story. And I would say for many of you who've never exhibited, a 1-page exhibit is a great place to start. It's a great place to start. It's quick, it's easy, it's not a lot of work, and from there you can progress. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, there are 1-page opportunities to exhibit, especially virtually. The American Topical Association, for those of you who are interested in topicals or thematics, they have a 1-page exhibition. They're actually soliciting 1-page exhibits at the moment. Another thing, which, okay, excuse the advert, EPAEX at 2024, this June, is actually having a 1-page exhibition on their website. They're soliciting 1-page exhibits in any category. Ideally, they would like something related to Wisconsin, but they're broad-minded and they're pretty much willing to accept anything. So for those, if there isn't a 1-page exhibition in where you live, where you have easy access, there are these opportunities virtually. Now, progressing forward from 1 frame, what's the next logical step? It's a 1-frame exhibit, 16 pages. Again, you're keeping it small. You're not overstretching yourself. You're not trying to fill 5 frames or 8 frames. Now, when the 1-frame category started, it was intended to be an opportunity for people starting to exhibit for the first time. That was really the primary focus of the 1-frame exhibiting when it started. However, it's somewhat got sidetracked from that because, especially at the international level, it was recognized that really no, shall we say, first-time exhibitors are showing at an international show because they have to go through a national qualification first. So they're not a new exhibitor. By the time they get to an international show, they already have a fair amount of experience. Nationally, at national shows, one frames can still be an opportunity for new collectors. But increasingly now, the idea of a one-frame exhibit is just like a one-page exhibit. It's a total story told in one frame in 16 pages. Again, you're picking off an easy target. One page, 16 pages. Certainly not 128 pages. Now, again, there are plenty of opportunities for one-frame exhibits. They're both in person and virtually. CAPEX 2022 was the first international FIP-related show for only one-frame exhibits. First time international one-frame FIP exhibition. SAVPEX, the South African show that I already mentioned, is an annual virtual one-frame exhibition that's been held now every year since 2015. So almost 10 years now of one-frame exhibits online. Now, larger exhibits, more work, more material. And traditionally at national and international exhibitions, people looked at 5 and 8 frames. That was kind of the two-step level that you had at most exhibitions. Now, I think of necessity, exhibitions are now embracing 2, 3, and 4 frame exhibits. They've come to recognize that a lot of subjects can't be told in one frame, and you can't expand them to 5 frames. And really restricting it to 5 or 8 frames is really unnecessary. The question is, what is the size of exhibit that's appropriate for the story you're trying to tell? And I think over time, we will start to see more exhibitions accepting different numbers of frames. Practically because there are unfortunately too few exhibitors, and also as more and more different subjects are being shown, there's a need for these 2, 3, 4 frame exhibits. Eventually, will we see FIP move to 10 frames? I hope so, especially in things like the championship class, because for many of those top-level exhibits, the extra 2 frames would allow the exhibitor a lot more scope to develop their subject. So, those of you who are familiar with shows, the next part will be kind of repetitive, but we have exhibitions at different levels. Most countries, you have small local shows. In the US, we have, for example, many of our state federations of stamp clubs have their own little local shows. Oftentimes these are 50 frames, usually 1 or 2 judges, very small scale. A great place to start. The shows here, again, a great place to start. Mega Mall or here. There are plenty of opportunities, 2 shows a year, as I'm sure there are always room for new exhibits. As you move up, you then have more of the national level shows. And again, almost every country has its own national shows. EPAEX is one of our 30-odd national shows that we have every year. South Africa, for many, many years, has had an annual national stamp show. The UK used to have 2 national shows a year, now they're down to 1. Canada has several national shows. So there are plenty of opportunities. I mean, here, Sharjah, every year, you have the show. Now, the next step up are obviously the continental shows. The Emirates Association and most of the GCC countries are all members of FIAP, the Asian Federation. FIAP is probably one of the most prolific organizers of exhibitions around the world, certainly much more so than Europe or the Americas. But those 2 other federations do also have their regional shows. It's kind of the next step up from your national show. And then obviously at the top level, there are the world exhibitions. And these are held under the rules and the guidelines of FIP. They have experienced judges. There are strict requirements for entry. You can't just go straight to an FIP show. You have to progress through the different levels step by step. You have ultimately the World Championship class. That is the sort of the World Cup, the Olympic gold medal of exhibiting. I apologize for the cover of the picture here. That seemed an appropriate choice of show catalog. Now, at the start I said that the minute you move from collecting to exhibiting, you're governed by rules. Rules and regulations are what drives the exhibitions. As an exhibitor, the first thing you need to do is to read and understand all of the rules. What do you have to do? What do the judges expect? What does the show expect? In most cases, you can get them on the show website, or you apply to the show and you say, please send me a prospectus, send me all the information. One of the worst mistakes an exhibitor can make is to assume what the answers are. I remember one Sharjah show, Javed, I don't know if you remember, there was an exhibitor who was busy handwriting his exhibit right before the show in Sharjah at the time, because he brought his material, but he hadn't mounted it on the pages. Again, if you're not sure, if you have a question, ask. Nobody's going to be upset if you ask a question. Find out what is expected of you. What do you have to do? Even down to things, each page should be in a protector. A number of exhibitors, I've seen it even at national shows in the States, the exhibitor brings their exhibit, they have all the pages beautifully written, but they didn't put them in page protectors. The page protectors are there to protect the material. Had they have read the rules, had they have read the prospectus, it says each page should be contained within a protector. So study the rules. Now, probably the most complicated part is when we talk about classes of exhibit. And this for a lot of people is incredibly confusing, because what is a class? I mean, all of a sudden we're talking about classes of exhibit. What does it really mean? Well, there are different classes defined in the prospectus of the show, and these also follow through into the judging criteria. And if you look even at the show catalogs, if you look at the show catalog for this show, each of the exhibits is under a classification. The first, and in my opinion, the most interesting and the most important classification is traditional. Personally speaking, it's the area I collect and enjoy the most. So what does traditional mean? Does it mean old-fashioned? Does it mean out of date? What does it mean? Well, it basically means stamp production, how the stamps are produced, and the purpose. What the stamps were for. How were they used? It's that simple. That's all it is. It's nothing more complicated than the production of the stamps, their purpose. Conceive from the designs, the origins, where did the designs come from? Who was the artist? All the way through the production process, the models, the essays, the die proofs, or photogravure proofs, varieties, mistakes, printing mistakes, and ultimately the use of those stamps on covers. That's all traditional means. It's nothing more complicated. Then there's postal history. Now, postal history sounds very sophisticated, very educational. Well, again, it's not that complicated. Most postal history exhibits come under three things: rates, routes, and markings. It's either a study of how did postal rates change over time, how did the carriage of mail change over time, and what different markings did the postal authorities stick on those covers? What were the markings? What did they represent? What was their purpose? So you're looking at how did the postal service develop over time. That's basically what postal history is, a combination of postal history over time. Now, in each case, generally speaking, your postal history will be set in a framework, a geographic framework, or some form of rate period. The Universal Postal Union was kind of a big milestone in terms of the handling of mail. You might study the mails before the UPU or after the UPU. You might study how the wartime changes to mail routes impacted the carriage of mail. The Second World War is a big example. There was a big change to rates and routes during the Second World War as a consequence of the war. So again, it's the study of the carriage of the mails within a geographical or a time period. Now, there are lots of other categories. There's thematics and topicals. Now, a lot of people assume thematics and topicals are basically the same. It's picture stamps about something. Well, there are differences, but I would be the first to admit that thematic and topical exhibiting is one of the hardest categories, because not only do you have to know about philately and postal history, but you also have to know the subject that you're exhibiting intimately. So in many respects, we always think of it as an easy option, but it really is not an easy option. It's a very, very tough area of exhibiting to do well. It's easy to do it badly. I mean, you just gather a few things together and put an exhibit together, but really, to do it well, it's very tough. Now, let's just say a little bit about the difference between thematics and topicals. Thematics are basically material from a wide range of countries. The most important thing is you need a broad range of countries. It is not one country. A strict thematic exhibit is not just stamps from one country, but all the material should be encapsulated, wrapped around one idea or theme. And it also needs a really, really well thought through plan, how to organize the material. Because otherwise it just becomes this kind of amorphous accumulation of stuff, more like a collection than an exhibit. Now topicals, basically it's how many stamps can I find showing military uniforms? How many stamps can I find showing airplanes? That's primarily the focus of a topical exhibit. It's just really images of that particular topic that you've adopted. And really, you can choose any topic that you wish. You could choose lions, you could choose cats, you could choose dogs, camels, whatever area particularly appeals to you. So in a sense, it's pretty loose in terms of its structure and focus. There's revenues. Now, revenues was a very, very popular area of collecting back in the very early 20th century. And then, for whatever reason, it kind of faded away from people's interest. And then back in the late 1980s, there became a resurgence of interest in revenue collecting. Now, revenues are a separate class, but they really, in some ways, follow the established pattern of other areas of collecting. You can collect revenue stamps in a traditional way. How were the revenue stamps produced? Who printed them? What were the designs? What were the models? And then you can show a few uses. Or you can take an alternative approach and say, okay, these revenue stamps were produced for fines, fees, licenses. And you can study the rates and the amounts that were charged for those different fees, those different services. And you can show documents illustrating those different charges and fees. So in a way, it's a separate class, but not really that much difference between traditional and postal history. There are the other categories that have come to the fore, display and social class. Now, what does social class or display really mean? Basically says you can include some non-philatelic material. So in the Gulf aviation, you've got some nice airplane tickets. Tickets for the different flights. Now, does that make it a social class exhibit? Well, no, not really, because the prime focus is on routes. So it's really strictly postal history. Now, some judges might say, well, there's non-philatelic material there. Well, it shouldn't really be there. Most judges give exhibitors a little bit of latitude. If there are a few items, that's okay. In a social or display exhibit, the proportion of non-philatelic material is much larger. It could be up to about 1/3 of the material be non-philatelic. So it could be your airplane tickets, it could be postcards showing airplanes, it could be timetables, it could be all sorts of things. But again, you have to maintain a balance between the philatelic material and the non-philatelic material. Then you also have the old traditional aerophilately. Now, aerophilately was just, the only difference was you were looking at mail carried by air as opposed to by ship or over land. But they were able to argue that they should be a separate class. Personally speaking, Javed may disagree. I think it would be a lot better if we could just kind of move back to a simpler group of classes and say all these separate divisions which are being created, I think makes the exhibitor's life more complicated and the judge's life more complicated. But now, postal stationery, another class. Is there a difference between postal stationery and traditional? Well, not really. You show essays, you show proofs, you show usage of the postal stationery. First aid covers. Now, first aid covers started being exhibited extensively in the US. Why? Because you had a tremendous number of different cachet makers. You had a huge number of different companies making pictorial design envelopes. You had a number of artists who made hand-painted essays, hand-painted designs on the envelopes. This was something that was almost unique to US philately going back to the 1920s, 1930s. It's very hard to put together a first aid cover exhibit for most other countries because you don't have the diversity of material. Maximophily, another class that was established at a very early stage. It's one that honestly has kind of gone out of fashion. It is not as extensively exhibited as it used to be. Astrophilately, again, this was very, very popular maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. As a class now, it has shrunk significantly. And oftentimes there are very, very few exhibits at any of the international shows. Picture postcards, the new area, the new up-and-coming area of collecting. There are several very, very good postcard exhibits in this show. There are two excellent ones from China, one on buildings in Beijing and one on the Chinese New Year. Now, is there any fundamental difference between a postcard exhibit and a regular philatelic, for want of a better term, exhibit? Not really. The procedures are largely the same. You show your knowledge, you organize the material in a logical fashion, you do all of the same things that you would with an exhibit, but your focus is on the picture side of the card. Again, the topic that you and I talked about the other day. You have a slightly different story. You want to talk about the cards themselves, whereas the criteria for picture postcard exhibiting is very much focused to the images on the cards. And so again, there's a guideline, there's a rule that kind of restricts what you can do. So we've talked about the classes, we've talked about all the different things. So how do you choose your topic? How do you choose what to exhibit? Well, the best place to start is to look at your collection and say, well, what part of my collection do I really enjoy the most? Which parts of my collection are the best? Which parts of my collection do I have the best material in? If you are looking to get the best possible award, you want to put your best foot forward and show the best material that you have. So for most people, that's going to largely determine what they're going to show. And then there's that question that I raised already. How much material do you got? How many frames can you realistically fill with what you've got? There are many times you see an 8-frame exhibit, which is really a 5-frame exhibit, and the exhibitor has stretched it. They've put in material that's not really relevant simply to fill the frames. So really, you need to look at the material you've got and say, what is the best, what is the optimal size and scope for what I'm trying to show? Knowledge. A lot comes back to knowledge. Read. Exhibiting is a learning curve. It's a two-way process. You get knowledge from the judges, you get knowledge from people visiting the show, but it's also your area to show your knowledge. Where's your knowledge come from? Reading, books, articles, journals. Access as much information as you can about the subject that you want to exhibit. Books. Books are a great source of information. It's hard today to really do much original research. I mean, that's a realistic limitation. If you look at the hobby today, we have over 100 years of cumulative research, studies of rates, routes, different stamp printers. There are still new books coming out. I mean, Kalachi's book on the Baghdad British occupation is a new book. He's done some remarkable census work. Abid Najjar's book on the stamps of Jordan has brought together a lot of information. But you say, okay, how much true original research is there, new innovative research. Realistically, you are going to be dependent on the shoulders of the people who've done the research in the past. Acknowledge it, use it. It's there to be used. It's there to be taken advantage of. And the judges are going to be looking for it. The judges are going to be looking to say, well, you're showing Iraq, you're showing World War I. Have you used Kalachi's book? Have you taken information from it? You're showing Transjordan. Have you used Najjar's book on the stamps and his companion book on the postal history? If you haven't, the judges are going to say, okay, well, knowledge, research, they haven't done this as thoroughly as they could have done. Now, composing an exhibit. Generally speaking, an exhibit is only part of your collection. Now, for some people, they only have their exhibit. But ideally, your exhibit should only be a part of your collection. Now, you need a clear focus on the subject. You need to develop your concept, your structure of your exhibit based on the exhibit class that you're showing. A traditional exhibit needs a balance between the essays, the proofs, the stamps, and the covers. A postal history exhibit does not need mint stamps. It's actually, in most cases, a detriment to have mint stamps in a postal history exhibit. Probably the most important page you're going to compose is your title page. It's going to say what your exhibit is all about, the purpose and the scope. Ideally, you want to say that right at the start. Be upfront about what you're going to show. Now, the other thing is, everything in your exhibit needs to be relevant. If you're showing Qatar postal history, there shouldn't be covers that have no direct bearing on that subject. If you're showing Egypt postal history, everything should be focused towards that specific aim. In a postcard exhibit, again, your focus is on the picture side. Within the current exhibiting structure, you're not going to be spending too much time on the back of the card. You're not going to be discussing, well, this card went through the mail, it went from A to B, and it has a penny stamp on the back. From a postcard perspective, that's irrelevant. It is completely irrelevant to the current structure of picture postcard exhibiting. They also don't care if the stamps have been torn off either, but that's a whole other point. Now, I said that the judging is all done under strict criteria, and almost every single show works with kind of a variation of the evaluation form that's shown on the slide. You've got the different categories and the different point scores that the judges are going to use. They have the title, they have the jury, who the chair is, and they allocate the points. And almost every show uses a variation of this form. There really isn't any significant differences between countries, between the different levels, whether it's a local show or a full FIP show. Basically, the judging criteria is pretty much standardized. Now, what is treatment? Treatment sounds kind of like traditional. It sounds like a very confusing word. What does it simply mean? It simply means how you organize and develop the subject. That's all. It's what you've done with the stuff and how you've arranged it. What's the storyline that actually connects all of the material through the exhibit? Now, the treatment has to relate to the title, the purpose, and the scope. And the treatment is what underlines your plan. What is your plan? Chapter 1, Chapter 2, however many chapters you need. The treatment is what underlies that plan. Has the exhibitor developed their plan to a reasonable depth? Have they got balance? Have they got completeness? If you're showing the first issue of a given country and you show 3 of the 4 values, obviously the judges are going to say, well, there's something wrong with the treatment here. Why is he not showing the 4th value? Well, it may be because the 4th value is the most expensive one and you don't have it. Well, if you're going to do that, you then have to come up with a logical reason why you are showing the 3 values rather than, well, I couldn't afford it. And sometimes there is a justification. Well, the 3 values came out at one time and the 4th value, the expensive one, came out at a different time. So you can present a logical argument for the treatment that you've adopted. But it needs to be truthful and it needs to be consistent. Now, the idea is when the judges come to your exhibit and they look at the treatment, can they actually follow what the story the exhibit is saying? If they walk up to the third frame, do they have a sense of where they are in the story? The treatment is really very, very important to putting your exhibit together. Now, importance is one of the big areas of disagreement. A number of exhibitors say, well, you know, importance, it's unfair. It shows bias towards classic material. I show a modern subject, so I don't have a chance to get points in importance. Well, 20 years ago, that was largely true. If you didn't show first issues and you didn't show classic countries, then you were going to get a 5 or, if you were lucky, a 6 in importance. Increasingly, and I say increasingly because it's not always the case, but increasingly, judges now look at importance in terms of two sides. The first is, where does this exhibit fit in terms of the wider subject of philately, period and place? Where within the context of classic issues, semi-modern or modern, where does it fit? And then they're saying, okay, this exhibit of Dubai, how does it compare with, objectively, other exhibits of Dubai or potential other exhibits of Dubai? How comprehensive, how well done is this exhibit in relation to the specific field? And that gives exhibitors of modern material a much fairer chance to score higher on importance. Is that a fair way to say it, Javid? Yeah, okay. It's much fairer to, and to be realistic, it's much fairer to most exhibitors of GCC countries. Qatar, under the traditional criteria, would generally speaking not necessarily score highly in importance. Under the current criteria, it is going to score more highly. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, the same thing. Sharjah, the same thing. In the old days, say Ottoman posts would score more highly on importance. Today, the scales have become more balanced, and that's a good thing. Knowledge and research. I hate to keep repeating myself, but my wife tells me I do it all the time. Knowledge, study, and research. Knowledge, study, and research. These are really, this is where you sell yourself. It's partly a question of, do you have the stuff? Do you have the stamps? Do you have the covers? Do you have the postal history? But you've also got to show your knowledge. Now, part of the trick with knowledge is, what have you actually chosen to show? Are you showing unusual postmarks, or are you showing common postmarks? Are you showing multiples which are particularly rare to get? Or are you showing stamps that, well, these stamps exist in abundance in multiples, so why do you necessarily show the multiples? Your knowledge comes through not just in the words on the page, but what you've selected to show. That reflects your knowledge too. Now, again, one of the areas that's a big source, well, I need to say everything I can about what I'm showing. Well, yeah, you need to say enough, but the judges don't have time to read lots of words. The public doesn't want to read lots of words. You need to be brief. You need to get your message across quickly and concisely and briefly. But you also need to be correct in everything you say and all the conclusions. If you're not sure about a fact relating to the material, don't guess. Try and research it. Or say, believed to have been issued, believed to be, or considered to be. And if you can quote a source, so much the better. So brevity is really, really important. And one of the mistakes I think a lot of new exhibitors make is they just write too much. And every time you punch the key on the keyboard, that's work. The less work, the better. So write less. Now, rarity. This is another of the big controversial things. In the old days, the judges tended to expect every single rarity within a field to be there. You were expected to be truly complete in all the rare material. Today, it's more a question of, do you have a reasonable proportion of the rare material? Increasingly, as the market has developed, as prices have changed, it's not necessarily realistic for any one collector to own all the rarities within a given field. So again, one is looking for a question of balance. is there enough of the rare material? Now again, the other aspect to rarity is, has the collector identified the rare material? Have they actually pointed out, in many cases, what are really the key items? Now, again, it's helpful to the judges to either frame or give some indication of the rare items. Now, partly it's to help the judges, but also it's to help you draw the judge's attention to the fact that actually, I have those very rare values in this series. So again, it's a two-way process. You're actually helping yourself. Now, one of the, again, mistakes, if that's the right word, that a lot of new collectors make is they say a rare cover, scarce. That is not a good way to explain rarity. It is not a helpful way to explain rarity because it's a completely subjective comment. Ideally, any statement of rarity should be quantified based on you abbreviate this obviously. Based on my personal study, I have recorded 6 examples of this proof. 6 known, 6 recorded. On your title page or synopsis, you may explain, well, I did the census. There are 5 covers known with this rate in the period. Don't just say it's a rare cover, because again, based on different subjects, different fields, the fact that there are 5, there might only be 1 collector. So that the fact that there are 5 covers, is that really a rarity? On another area, there might be an abundance of collectors and they're all fighting for every single one of those 5 covers, and it might be considered a rarity. So again, you have to relate it to the subject that you're showing and quantify it and not just make it a subjective comment. Again, another area that may seem subjective is condition. Again, it relates to the material. If you collect certain areas, the material is going to be toned. It's going to have, the envelopes are going to be toned, and that's a simple fact of life. Wreck covers, they're also going to come kind of ugly and kind of damaged. But in terms of condition, the one thing that you must always do, if you have an item which is restored or repaired, you must note that. You will be penalized by the judges if you have repaired or restored items that are not indicated as such. The penalization might be they tell you to get a certificate. Usually that's the first time. The second time, if you haven't got the certificate, then you will find that you might lose a medal or you might get a reduced point score. Presentation, what's presentation? Well, presentation is just the packaging. It's like you're in a supermarket and you walk down the row of shelves. What do you grab off the shelf? It's all about what your exhibit looks like in the frames or on the computer screen. And it's, again, this can be subjective, but there are things you can do to make it helpful. Use headings. Headings are one of the key things that judges focus on. Exploit and take advantage of headings. Now, you can use your personal judgment. There are a couple of exhibits on the floor out there which use very strongly colored pages. Sometimes the strongly colored pages can be attractive, sometimes they're not. Years ago in South Africa, 1 or 2 people started doing strongly colored pages, gray, cream, very strongly cream color pages, and then everybody started doing them. And really, it reached a point where it was a detraction. It was not an addition. It didn't add interest to the exhibit. Choose a style that works for you. Look at your material. Think about what color of white, and I say color of white. White can range from, ultra white photocopy style paper to off-white, just like white paint on the wall. Choose a shade of white that works for your material. Matting the covers, not matting the covers. Again, this is personal judgment. Think about what looks good to you. Keep in mind that a lot of those decisions are subjective. Some of the judges may hate what you do. If you think it's beautiful and you want to do it that way, that's okay. It's your choice. Innovation, creativity. Now this again is where it emphasizes the point I was making. If you do something that is out of the norm, it may work or it might not. I mean, today in postal history, especially at a lot of the FIP shows, the exhibits all look the same. It's almost like you could take the covers off and put another bunch of covers up and you couldn't tell the difference. They become very standard. Partly that has come from groups like the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, because they say, this is the way you must do it. This is the way you have to do it. So what does everybody do? They do what they're told is the way to do it. Actually, it would be wonderful to start seeing exhibitors be more innovative, come up with alternative ways of doing things. Especially now with computers, there are so many different things you can do. There are so many different options, so much more creativity that you can apply. Sometimes it will work, other times it won't. If it works, you get the judge's attention, they're going to love the exhibit. If they hate it, they're going to move on, and you're probably not going to do as well as you would like. Judges and their assumptions. Now this one, I shared this with another judge in the US who I respect his opinions, and he made me change this slide. One of the things, every judge assumes that every exhibitor wants to win the top award. They assume that every exhibitor wants their exhibit to do better every time they show. At the end of the day, not every exhibitor wants to do that. Some actually just show for the sheer pleasure of it. So if you get harassed by a judge at the end of the show, like, well, I want to tell you what to do. I want to tell you how to improve your exhibit. You may not want to hear that. You may be totally happy with what you've done, and it's okay. But keep in mind, the judges are going to want to help you. And it's all very well intentioned, but it may not be what you want to hear. So that's an assumption that judges make. A good judge also does not assume he knows more than you do. You many times will know more than the judge does. And that's again another argument why you need to show your knowledge on the pages. You need to share your knowledge with the judges. Again, repeating what I said about presentation, a lot of judges assume there's kind of like a universal formula of putting an exhibit together. It's like plug and play. You stick the video cassette in the machine and it plays and out comes the exhibit. Historically, there was much more diversity in exhibits. There was much more range of styles. You used to have handwritten exhibits. You had exhibits on quadral pages with little grid squares behind them. There used to be so much broader range of diversity. Now I think, unfortunately, many judges assume there's this universal formula, and if you don't follow that formula, it's not a good exhibit. And that's an area of debate. What does a judge actually, what are the skills a judge has? Well, the judges usually have common sense. They've struggled to put exhibits together themselves, but they also have a sense of what it takes to put together a good exhibit. And that's where you're going to get the benefit from the judges, is their experience, not necessarily in depth about your subject, but the practices of exhibiting. That's the thing where you can get the most benefit from the judges. And that doesn't necessarily mean getting a higher medal. It can simply be helping you expand your knowledge and grow your knowledge and grow your experience. Title pages, plans, and exhibits. A few years ago, Javed, I did a talk on title pages. A lot of it's pretty standard stuff. I don't know if you still have those slides or not. Your title page is really one of the key pages in your exhibit. Your title page is going to go through several revisions. You're going to start with a draft, you're going to change it, you're going to modify it, you put the exhibit together, you're going to change it again, you're going to change it again, and before you finally send it in, you're going to keep changing it. A synopsis, and synopsis for internationals is very unusual. Most national, or many national shows allow you to submit a synopsis. What is a synopsis? It's basically a couple of page summary of your exhibit. It's your opportunity to tell the judges how fantastic your exhibit is. All the key items, what's strong about it, where your personal research is. It's basically your resume, It's like you're applying for a job and this is your resume. Tells the potential employer how fantastic you are and why they should give you the job. The synopsis gives the judges, it makes the judges want to come and look at this exhibit. The one thing that I would emphasize is you need to be positive, but you also need to be realistic. If you exaggerate in your synopsis, when the judges go to look at the exhibit, they're going to be disappointed. So yes, it's your opportunity to sell yourself and to sell the exhibit, but be realistic in what you say. And the other important thing with the synopsis is give the judges a short list of useful references. What are the 3 or 4 main sources of information that you've used? Were they articles? Were they books? Choose things that are readily accessible. There's no point, for example, if you have an American judge like me, giving them a list of references that are all in Chinese. It's completely pointless because I can't read them. I can look at the pictures, but I can't read them. Giving me references in Finnish, completely useless. References in Russian, completely useless. If I gave Javed a list of references, every single article is written in German, he might be able to struggle through, but it's not helpful. So keep in mind the potential language skills of the judges, and keep in mind what are the best references that are in a readily accessible language, and also which are accessible. If you refer to some obscure journal published 50 years ago that the only copy is in the Collectors Club Library in New York, the chances of a judge in South Korea getting access to that journal is impossible. So again, it's not a helpful thing to do. So make your references useful and accessible. Points, medals. Again, these are all pretty standard. There's no real point dwelling on these. Again, you'll find them in the show criteria, the show prospectus. Now here's a really important thing. Don't be disappointed. Don't be discouraged. You know, no exhibit is going to be perfect first time out. You're going to make changes. You're going to acquire a new item that suddenly changes the first frame. There's always room for improvement. There's always scope. Again, not all judges will see the exhibit the same way. A judge who, and this can work both ways, a judge who is intimately familiar with the area that you're showing might be a lot harsher on you as an exhibitor because he knows the material so well. A judge who's less experienced in the specific area might say, oh my goodness, I've never seen an exhibit like this before. I really like it. It's provocative, it's inspirational. So you're going to get 2 very different perspectives depending on the experience and the background of the judge. So not all juries are going to give you the same result. And you can change a full medal level. It would be unusual to change 2 or 3 medal levels. It's not unknown, but it would be unusual. But to change 1 medal level, don't be discouraged. Don't be shocked. Can every medal or can every exhibit win a large gold medal? Some judges will tell you that every exhibit has the potential to win a large gold medal. But at the end of the day, and some judges will berate me for saying this, for some exhibits there is a glass ceiling. Certain exhibits will not exceed a certain medal level, no matter how good they are, no matter how well they're put together, no matter what a beautiful presentation is adopted. So again, don't be disappointed. Depending what you're showing, a large vermeil might be the best you could hope for. And don't be discouraged. If you get a large vermeil for a subject, that might be really very good. Now, if you get a bronze, well, you know, then we can talk about things. So don't be discouraged. And as I say, some judges would disagree with that and say every exhibit has the potential. It might, but might. Now, ideas, places to look. Here, just a few suggestions, and this is the last slide, you'll be pleased to know. So it wasn't 45 minutes, it was an hour and 6 minutes. we'll leave this slide up for a minute or two. The AAPE, the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, they have a website. There's a lot of exhibits mounted up there. There's a lot of information. Think of it as suggestions, not rules. Think of it as suggestions. Now, what the second reference may seem a little counterintuitive. Why do I want to look at a judging manual? Well, you want to put yourself in the mind of the judges. You want to know, how are the judges going to approach my exhibit? So if you go to the APS website and you go under Judging and Exhibiting, you will find the current copy of the judging manual. Look at it, read it. It will actually give you ideas. Now, where do you go to look for different exhibits? Exponet is a great place to start. I emphasized about go to shows, look at exhibits, look at exhibits, look at exhibits. This is a great place you can look at exhibits in the comfort of your own home at your own time. Now, one of the problems that a lot of people have with an exhibit, and it's a language issue. There are all sorts of complicated philatelic terms for different things. And a lot of times it's easy to use what's not really the right word. One of the best places to go, if you're trying to think of what is the right word for this proof, essay, whatever, model, artist drawing, whatever. The Postal Museum, the US Postal Museum in Washington, has done this glossary. And it actually defines the term, explains the term. And if you're trying to say, well, how do I best call this item? This is a great place to go. Because in many exhibits, terms are misused. Something is misdescribed. An essay might be called a proof, or a proof gets called something, a plate proof, a die proof. They're all different. And a lot of times exhibitors call things the wrong thing. And that is a great place to go to find the right terms to describe the items precisely. There are lots of other sources of information. But again, one of the things that I said earlier, ask. If you're exhibiting for the first time, go to somebody who's exhibited before. Go to somebody who's exhibited a lot. Ask their advice. Sit down with them and say, well, listen, this is what I think I'm going to do. What do you think? Get their feedback, get their opinions. Opinions from other collectors are almost as important as the ones you're going to get from the judges at the frames. So that brings us to a close. Your computer. Are we allowed questions? Or Javid, do we have? Yeah.
Yes, I am confused between the rare stamp and the mistakes stamps.
Between an error?
A rare stamp and error stamp.
Rare.
Yeah, could you define for us, what's the difference between both of them?
All right. Okay, a rare stamp and an error stamp.
Yes.
Okay.
Are they the same or are...
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
There are certain errors which, it all comes down to numbers. It all comes down to numbers. For example, you might have the inverted Jenny of the US, the 1918 24-cent inverted airmail. There was one sheet of 100 stamps. There were 100. There only ever were 100. There only ever will be 100. There's a couple that they don't quite know where they are because they were stolen and they haven't been recovered yet, but there only ever were 100. Now, is that a rare stamp? It's an error. The plane's upside down. Yes. Is it rare? Well, there are 100 of them. 100 is a pretty big number, but it is an expensive stamp. Yeah. I mean, the most recent highest price was $2-point-something million for one. Happens to be the best condition out of the sheet. But 100 is still quite a lot. Now, you might have an error sheet that there were only 25 stamps on the sheet. But that might sell for $1,000. Now, why is an inverted Jenny $2 million and the other one that's only 25 $1,000? Well, because the one's been in movies, it's been in books, and you talk to a kid and they say, oh, have you got an upside down airplane? It's got notoriety, it's got a brand. Now, proofs. De La Rue die proofs generally exist in quantities somewhere between 6 and 10. Best guess. Dubai Airport's issue. You get the progressive proofs, the color separations, the imperf sheets, and whatever. They're proofs too. There must be hundreds of sheets of those proofs. Are they rare? No. Are they pricey? No. It all comes to demand and supply. Something can be very rare, but only sell for a matter of a few £100s. I mean, some of the revenue stamps, for example, are very scarce. There may only be 3 or 4 known, but there's a very limited demand. So you have to relate the demand and the supply. And you also have to relate to what country, what period, and how visual it is. I mean, there are some Indian states revenue stamps where you get the inverted center. The stamp is all purple, and honestly, you look at it quickly and you can't tell that I think it's a Maharaja or something, his head is upside down. You can't tell. You look at an inverted airplane, it's visually recognizable. All of that impacts the value. Rarity and value are not synonymous. I mean, they move together in an association, but they're not one and the same. They're very different.
Thank you.
Yes, question. I agree with the going now to digital with the exhibitions, but still the face-to-face interaction. It's not about the exhibitions and what we see. It's the meeting of other people, exchanging ideas, things, discussions around. This also is very important and valuable. So I can imagine if we only have digital exhibitions behind screens, you know, we will be missing on the other important part, which is the human interaction with other people coming from different parts of the world.
You are
and
100%
sharing,
correct. You are 100% correct. It should not be one or the other. It needs to be a combination of both. But, and this is something people have been talking about a lot, how many shows, how frequently the shows should be, where they should be in the world, what is the optimal balance in terms of how many shows per year, at what levels. I mean, some years, I mean, during COVID, there were no, during the early stages of COVID, because COVID's still here, during the early stages of COVID, there were no in-person shows. Then all of a sudden, as the pandemic waned, as the tide went out, you had this abundance of shows. Like every 2 months, there was another international show. That's not helpful. How many shows a year can somebody realistically go to? They have a job. How much time, cost? There needs to be a balance. Personally speaking, and this is a personal opinion, I think there needs to be a serious reassessment of the number of shows and their frequency and periodicity. There needs to be a balance. And we seem to swing from feast to famine. In fairness, the shows have got shorter. If you go back to the 1980s, a lot of your shows, your international shows, were 2 weeks.
Wow.
And that was ridiculous. That was ridiculous. Now you've got 4-day shows. Now, is that too short? Is it, you know, I think from the top, and this is where, in my opinion, and I stress it's a personal opinion, FIP should be looking at coordinating the annual calendar. They should be looking to coordinate some sort of healthy balance, because it just, I think there's too much pressure being put on exhibitors because the shows are soliciting exhibits. I mean, in the US, let's take the US with 30 national shows. Every show is crying, we need exhibits, we need exhibits, we need exhibits. Several shows, I mean, there's a show that they have in Plymouth, just outside of Detroit, near Ann Arbor. It's been a national show for decades. This year, they only had, at the exhibit deadline, 3 exhibitors. They had to cancel the exhibit side of the show. Nobody wanted to exhibit. Increasing the shows are coming under pressure. So logic says the shows are expensive to organize. You need volunteers. Maybe if we cut down on the number of shows and our expectation, our demand on the exhibitors It's taken some of that pressure away, because if it were not for certain people who exhibit frequently, you couldn't sustain those number of shows. And so I really think there's a need. I mean, I think 2 shows a year is a good balance. You have 2 shows a year here, that's good. But in the US, when you're at 30 shows, it's crazy. And some years when you're at 4 FIP shows in the course of a year, that's an awful lot. It's pressure on judges. The judges have got to get to the shows. The commissioners have got to get to the shows. And I think if we all put our hand on our hearts, we say, well, there's somewhere there's a healthy balance. And it, in my opinion, personal opinion, I hope that eventually there will be some sort of rationalization. But you're absolutely right, we do need the in-person side to it. I mean, you commented on this the other day. Specifically, you said, I like the in-person shows because of the personal contact. I think I'm quoting you correctly.
I saw on a slide it was saying that restored items should be highlighted. But in fairness, we have not seen any such items on exhibits. What I mean that some people, they repair the item, but they never mention. So jury is going to penalize those items or no?
In theory, at the FIP show, you have the, the expert team that go around looking for fakes and restored items, forgeries, and so on. And that's their function is, and the jury team is supposed to say to the expert team, look at frame 3, page 2 of this exhibit. We think there's a questionable item. Under normal circumstances, the exhibitor, if they have a restored item or a fake item or something that's not genuine, they'll get a school report, a reprimand. Please submit this item for a certificate before you re-exhibit it. In theory, they should not, and correct me if I'm wrong, in theory, that first time, they should not be specifically penalized points or a medal. They're given a warning. It's like a green card. They're given a warning. Should they exhibit the same item again, but they have not obtained a certificate saying it's good, then they can be penalized.
Some of them obvious. I mean, the Bayern one, you can see it's Bayern one. I mean, it's shown, you have guarantee, you know it's Bayern.
Well, but there's a difference between something being burnt in a wreck or a crash, then it hasn't been changed. A repaired or a restored item is where somebody has cosmetically improved it. They've restored an address. Or, and this is the big issue with Qatar, somebody's taken an old-fashioned manual typewriter and written PDQ on the back from Bahrain to make it appear to be a Qatar cover instead of a Bahrain cover. If somebody is showing one of those for some reason, they should indicate that it is faked.